The bullies knocked a girl in her wheelchair to the ground. 30 minutes later, an ordinary black girl stood before the entire school and made them pay. They thought no one would dare stand up, that by toppling a girl in a wheelchair at the center of the courtyard, tossing in a few laughs and a handful of averted glances, silence would do the rest. But they were wrong, because 30 minutes later, an everyday black girl, unknown, unremarkable, with no power or prestige, stepped out of the crowd. Not with fists, not with threats, but with a silent, unyielding plan. In front of everyone, she forced those who once strutted with arrogance to bow their heads in shame. This isn't just a story of retaliation. This is a journey of courage, of clear-eyed resolve, and of how a single voice, even one that never has to raise its volume, can command the attention of an entire system. And you'll never look at silence the same way again. 13-year-old Trinity Hayes sat motionless in her pewter-gray wheelchair, a lavender backpack slung carelessly over one wheel. She didn't blend in with the river of students flowing past her. No one paused to walk beside her. They drifted by, like passing a lamppost. Not because Trinity was weak or dull. She was a top student, always submitting her assignments early, offering insightful answers in science class, and possessing a bright, vibrant laugh that her music teacher once called the very sound that makes your afternoon a little lighter. But she didn't fit Jefferson High's mold, a mold carved for tall white kids from well-off families, none of whom needed a wheelchair to get around. Trinity has spina bifida, a congenital condition that keeps her spine from forming correctly. She's never known what it feels like to run or to jump, but she doesn't need anyone's pity. To her, the wheelchair isn't a flaw. It's as much a part of her as her shoes, her glasses, or her hair, and she's learned to live with it. Still, Trinity's presence was something most students chose to ignore, whether by accident or design. Not with open hostility, but by rendering her invisible. No one talked to her. No one invited her to play games during gym. No one offered help when it rained and the walkways turned slick. Trinity was used to it. She stayed still, watching the boisterous crowd file into the building. Some classmates sprinted by, arms full of books. Others live-streamed on their phones. A few boys kicked an empty water bottle as if scoring the winning goal in some imaginary stadium. One or two brushed past her wheels without so much as a glance over their shoulders. A breeze stirred the ends of Trinity's hair, slipping under the collar of her white polo. She tugged her sleeve down and fixed her gaze on the far-off school doors. Just a few yards ahead, yet always feeling like miles. Those doors didn't just open into classrooms, they opened into stairs, whispered rumors, and sometimes cruel smirks. Trinity wasn't afraid of the classroom. She was afraid of the hallways, afraid of stairwell corners without mirrors, afraid of unnamed pranks everyone called just for fun. And this morning, a strange feeling hummed in her chest, a chill of premonition. Her cheap digital watch beeped 3 soft buzzes. Time to head to homeroom. She pushed her wheel forward. One roll, then another. What she didn't know was that in the next 10 minutes her wheelchair would flip, her books would rain down on the tiled floor, and mocking laughter would echo behind her. But from that fall, a tremor would begin, not with an explosion, but with a single person rising from a seated position. A tremor called Amia Cross. The school doors were still fewer than 10 pushes away, but the instant Trinity's hands touched the wheel rims, a large shadow cut off the light ahead. Chad Benson. Nearly 6 feet tall, despite only being in 8th grade, his broad frame built from years of playing football. Square-jawed with neatly trimmed hair, eyes narrowed in a contemptuous smirk, as if perpetually ready to judge everyone around him. Chad didn't need to shout to command attention. His mere presence made the hallway air grow heavy. Behind him stood his 2 usual satellites, Hunter Sloan, blonde hair, and a grin that suggested he thought the whole world was one big joke. And Mike Radley, quieter, but with eyes that always roved, as if cataloging every expression on his victims' faces to later recount with cruel laughter in the boys' restroom. The three of them formed a horizontal barrier, blocking Trinity's ramped path. Chad crossed his arms and looked down at her wheelchair as if inspecting a faulty product. "Move out of the way," Trinity said, her voice low but steady. She didn't expect them to comply. She was simply keeping herself calm. Hunter burst out laughing. "Hey, Chad, what if we slap a jet engine on that thing? She might make it to class on time without dropping her dignity all along the way." Mike mimicked a mocking squeak every time Trinity inched forward, an obnoxious routine he'd practiced for 2 months straight in math class. Chad said nothing. He stooped slowly forward, his hand gripping the front axle of Trinity's chair. His eyes shifted from playful to cold and empty with self-satisfaction. "Let me help you," he whispered. And before Trinity could react, he lifted the chair's front a few inches, enough to throw her balance entirely. Trinity tilted off. She reached out toward the floor to steady herself, but the wheel was askew, dumping her full weight to one side. Her wheelchair tipped over, clattering onto the cold tile with a harsh, echoing bang that silenced nearby students instantly. She fell in a way that wasn't just physical. It was a blow to her pride. She didn't cry out. She didn't shed a tear. She simply lay there, eyes fixed on the muted sky above, her backpack slipping off one shoulder, and her books scattered around her. A copy of To Kill a Mockingbird flipped open in the breeze, as if even the pages were turning away from her. Hunter nudged Chad and laughed. "Nice one, bro." Mike laughed along. A few onlookers covered their mouths. Others turned away. No one spoke. No one helped. That silence, that's complicity. Chad stood there, expressionless, nodding in satisfaction. To him, Trinity wasn't a person, just an object he could press firmly into the place below he believed she deserved. But Chad's cruelty wasn't accidental. It was taught. His father sat on the district's school board. His mother owned a high-end spa in the Vestavia suburbs. The Benson family funded the school gym, and the words Benson Family Court gleamed on a brass plaque in the sports arena. Chad never faced consequences for roughhousing on the field, never received a mark for cursing at the PE teacher. To many adults at Jefferson, Chad was a future leader, just a little mischievous. Trinity knew all that. That's why she didn't scream, didn't beg. In this place, her wheelchair-mounted voice wasn't loud enough to cut through the honor roll plaques lining the walls. Instead, she whispered, something so faint only she could hear it. Maybe a prayer, maybe a promise. At that moment, a pair of black Converse sneakers stepped down from bus 12. They paused, then moved swiftly through the crowd that swarmed around Trinity like flies to fresh pain. A clear voice rang out. "Having fun, boys?" The entire schoolyard froze. Amia Cross had arrived. "Having fun, are you?" The voice sliced through the silence like a razor, tearing through the hush that had settled over the schoolyard. It wasn't high or harsh, but it carried an invisible push that made the bullies freeze in place and sent the students who had been turning their backs glancing over their shoulders. Amia Cross stood there, back straight, her backpack still slung over one shoulder, an oversized denim jacket hanging past her hips, her braided hair wrapped neatly into a crown bun atop her head. Her eyes locked onto Chad Benson as if she were staring down a caged wild animal. She wasn't a standout. No honor roll, no club photos, no high grades splashed on bulletin boards. But anyone who'd spent enough time around her knew Amia didn't have to raise her voice to be heard. She had a kind of quiet authority that forced attention the moment it began to stir, and now it was in motion. She stepped through the low murmur of students forming a barrier around Trinity. No one dared block her path. No one said a word. When she bent to help Trinity, her hand grazing the scraped flesh on Trinity's arm, everyone saw clearly this was no token gesture. This was a choice, a declaration. "You think this is funny?" Amia repeated, her voice lower, firmer. Chad raised an eyebrow. He'd heard that tone before, not from teachers or other adults, but from people who weren't afraid of him. Instinctively, he took a half step back, but then he forced a smile and pushed forward again. "It's none of your business," he sneered. "Not anymore," Amia replied, standing up. The two faced off. Chad was taller, broader, his smirk trying to mask a flicker of uncertainty, because what Chad would never understand, and might take him a long time to learn, was that silence isn't weakness, and quiet people aren't always easy to conquer. Amia didn't argue. She didn't overreact. She simply turned back, gently set Trinity's wheelchair upright, and carefully scooped up her scattered books. The crowd began to buzz. A few students pulled out phones to record. Others stared at the ground, as if afraid Amia's gaze might catch them doing nothing. Hunter shot Chad a hesitant look. Mike took a step back, scratching his head as if the joke had suddenly lost its punchline. Chad clenched his jaw. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone outside his accepted circle. "She's brave, isn't she?" Chad muttered, half laughing, half sneering. Amia didn't turn around. She simply asked Trinity in a soft, steady voice, "You okay?" Trinity nodded. Her shoulder stung from the scrape and her wrist throbbed, but her eyes lit up meeting Amaya's. In that moment, Trinity's silence found its perfect counterpart, and something ignited. "Let's go," Amia said, gentle but resolute, pushing Trinity's chair up the ramp toward class. Only then did Mr. Lenny Hart, the morning hall monitor, his shirt slightly rumpled, tie askew, breathing as if he'd just climbed 3 flights, hurry over. "What happened here?" he called. No one answered. Not a single student spoke up. Chad glanced around. No allies in sight, no sympathetic words. He scowled, shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, and stalked off as if bored with the whole scene. No one was reprimanded. No one was suspended. Like so many other incidents involving Trinity, it would have faded away if nothing had changed. But this time, a spark had been struck. A small movement Chad never saw coming, could not anticipate, and could not stop. A fire was kindling, slow, deep, and a plan was taking shape. Not a single complaint escaped her lips, not a flicker of resentment crossed her face. Amia wheeled Trinity away from the cluster of onlookers as if closing a small, painful chapter, but in her mind a new plan was already taking shape. She wasn't one to rally a crowd or stage a fiery showdown, but she understood something most students never learn early on. Victory doesn't always go to the loudest voice. Sometimes victory is forcing the cruel to hear themselves and realize just how awful they sound. That afternoon, while most of the school streamed into the cafeteria for lunch and Chad Benson loudly bragged to his friends about this morning's prank, Amia knocked on Mrs. Denise Carter's door. Mrs. Carter was not only Amia's homeroom teacher but also the coordinator of the Unity Challenge, an every semester event designed to foster cooperation, respect, and understanding among students. Mrs. Carter poked her head out, still clearing away her salad container and opening her laptop to review team rosters. "Yes, Cross?" What can I do for you?" Amia drew in a steady breath. She had thought this through. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment idea. It was an intellectual counterpunch, not an emotional reaction. "I want to join the Unity Challenge this afternoon." Mrs. Carter raised an eyebrow. "But I thought your team was already set." Amia shook her head. "I'd like to redo the teams, and I want Chad Benson on mine." The faculty lounge grew uncharacteristically still. Mrs. Carter blinked. A great teacher knows not only when to instruct, but when to ask the right questions. "Are you sure?" "I am. Why?" Amia's gaze was unwavering. "I don't need Chad suspended. I don't want him shamed. I just need him to face it, to participate, to cooperate. I want him to see exactly who Trinity is and what he's been." A moment of silence. Mrs. Carter closed her laptop and nodded slowly. "All right, but you'll need help from the event committee. They don't reshuffle teams on personal request." Amia had thought of that too. She'd already enlisted Coach Ramirez, the head of athletics and the only person in the school many students feared even more than Principal Gaines. Beneath his stern exterior was the heart of a seasoned father, and he'd long disliked Chad, not for pranks but for the remorseless cruelty he showed in every act. Coach Ramirez agreed to tweak the lineup so that Chad, Hunter, Mike, and Amia would all end up on the same team. That afternoon dawned bright. On the back field, organizers had set up obstacle course stations, rope climbs, sack races, basketball shots, relay runs, and the final event, a wheelchair zigzag push with a baton handoff. The obstacle relay, designed to build teamwork and spark empathy. When Mrs. Carter announced the new team rosters, Chad Benson looked up from his phone in surprise. "What? I'm on the same team as her?" His eyes landed on Amaya, clipboard held calmly at her side. Hunter muttered, "Oh no, we're bamboozled." Mike rolled his eyes. "I thought this was supposed to be fun." Amia stepped forward, holding out the roster. "Welcome to Red Team. I'm your captain, and you guys are students overdue for a lesson in kindness." Chad sneered but said nothing. Perhaps because so many were listening. Perhaps because for the first time he had no sharp retort. All eyes were on them. Teachers, parents, even Principal Gaines sat front and center. This was a major event. Live-streamed internally, posted on the school's website, reported to the district. Amia knew it. She didn't choose to fight in the shadows. She chose the spotlight. "The final game," she announced to the team, voice clear and strong. "The winners get to pick one teammate to have lunch with the principal. The losers clean the cafeteria all week." A ripple of excitement ran through the crowd. A few students laughed. Chad folded his arms. "And if I refuse to play?" he challenged. "Then your whole team loses because of you, and everyone will know why." Amia's voice wasn't loud, but it struck his pride like a sharp slap. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Chad Benson, the once confident bully, to realize he was trapped in someone else's game. The afternoon sky was cloudless. Sunshine streamed across Jefferson's backfield like shimmering threads of gold, illuminating the lush green grass and the rows of game stations set up since midday. The loudspeaker pulsed with energetic pop music, punctuated by the enthusiastic voice of the teacher in charge. "Welcome to the Spring Unity Challenge. Today, we compete not for points, but for team spirit." But for Amia Cross, this wasn't just a friendly contest. It was her stage, her ignition point, her clarion call of truth. She stood at the edge of the field, clipboard in hand, watching every movement with quiet intensity. A breeze lifted a few strands of her hair. Her gaze flicked toward Coach Ramirez, busy coordinating referees, yet discreetly nodding his approval. The teams had been rearranged as she requested. Red Team, Amia's team, stepped out of the staging area, each member wearing a matching Unity t-shirt. When Chad Benson, Hunter Sloan, and Mike Radley realized they'd be entering the field under Amia's leadership, the three nearly froze in place. "Wait, she's the captain?" Mike stammered. "No way," Hunter grimaced. Chad said nothing, but his eyes hardened as he grasped that this wasn't his arena anymore. Amia turned slowly as she heard their steps approaching. Her eyes settled on Chad, sending a clear, unspoken message. "Welcome to my game." "Welcome to Red Team," she said calmly. "We're one team now. If anyone disagrees, you're free to step out. But if you stay, you play seriously." Chad snorted. "Fine, play. But don't expect me to follow your orders." "I don't need you to obey," Amia replied. "I need you to cooperate." She turned away, leaving the three bullies standing dumbfounded in the middle of the field, like players realizing they're in a chess match where white has already moved 3 pieces. The whistle blew. The other teams lined up at the perimeter: green, yellow, orange, purple, and red, the only team captained by a black girl who wasn't on any sports roster. Coach Ramirez strode to center field with a microphone and announced the rules for the final event. Obstacle relay. Each team has 4 members. First runner clears the soft hurdles. Second participant completes the sack race. Third fires the basketball through the hoop. And the fourth will tackle the toughest challenge, pushing a wheelchair through a 30-meter zigzag course with the passenger holding the relay baton. A ripple of chatter ran through the spectators. Some soft laughs. "Whoa, that's tough," from Green Team. But the crowd fell silent when Amia spoke again. "The person in the wheelchair will be Trinity Hayes." Heads turned in unison. Trinity sat at the corner of the field, her navy and purple uniform crisp, her elbows still bandaged, eyes steady and unwavering. She didn't smile, she didn't flinch. She simply wheeled herself into the waiting zone. Chad's posture stiffened. He glared at Amia. "What?" "You're pushing her," Amia said, her words enunciated like a hammer strike. "Me? Why not you?" His voice cracked higher than usual, as if stretched by nerves. "I've done my part," Amia shrugged. "Now it's time for you to do what you've always avoided, face her." Hunter hesitated to laugh, seeing the tension in Chad's face. Mike took a step back, unwilling to intervene. Every student in the stands had witnessed this. Teachers lined the course, several raised phones to film. There was no turning back. The whistle blew again. The relay was on. Hunter darted forward, clearing the soft hurdles in a blur. Chad slapped Hunter's hand for the next tag. Mike lumbered through the sack race, clumsy but determined, finally reaching the line. Amia caught the baton and tossed the basketball in a graceful arc, swish, right through the net. Cheers erupted. Everything was on track. Then came the final leg. Chad took the baton, panting. Trinity waited, calm and silent as if this were any ordinary morning, yet something in her gaze made Chad unable to look away. Maybe it was her stillness. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't need him to prove anything. "Here's the baton," Chad stammered. "Just push straight," Trinity replied, placing her small hand on the wheel rim. The path before them was treacherous. Traffic cones, hidden obstacles, gravel patches. Chad pushed, the wheelchair wobbled. "Slow down, the chair's tilting," Trinity whispered. Chad steadied the wheels, sweat beading on his palms. He was used to giving commands, never taking them from someone he deemed below him. At least, that's what he'd always believed. Meter by meter, the crowd's roars swelled on both sides. They neared the finish. Amia shouted, "Go, Trinity!" Trinity raised the baton high, the late-day sun illuminating her face, no longer merely a symbol of disability, but an emblem of quiet strength. When they crossed the line, Chad came to a halt, breathing hard, speechless. Trinity didn't smile. Instead, she looked at Amia, then up to the vast sky overhead, the same sky she'd stared at this morning in silent resolve. Now, she'd risen from the ground, not on legs, but through her presence. A steady wave of applause rippled from the stands, quiet but unwavering, like a shared heartbeat that began the moment Trinity and Chad crossed the finish line. They had won. The wheelchair slowed to a crawl as it passed the final white stripe, and Trinity raised the relay baton overhead as if it were a torch. A breeze teased her hair, and the late afternoon sun broke through thinning clouds, spotlighting her clenched hand in golden light, proud, composed. Behind her, Chad stood motionless, his hands still gripping the wheelchair's push handles. He panted heavily, but this time it wasn't from exertion, it was confusion. For the first time in his school career, Chad Benson wasn't receiving cheers. He wasn't being lauded. He wasn't at the center of attention. Because every gaze, students, teachers, even parents clustered at the edge of the field, was fixed on Trinity. Not simply because she'd finished first, but because of how she'd carried herself, after everything that had happened, still upright, still steady, never looking down. She didn't smile. She didn't nod a thank you. She didn't wave back at the crowd. Yet, that very silence coaxed the audience to their feet, one row at a time, as if they all understood they'd witnessed something too significant to let slip by. Amia stepped forward, coming up behind Chad, her eyes bypassing him to rest on Trinity, and announced loudly, "We have our winner." She turned toward the coordinators. As agreed, Red Team gets to send one member to lunch with the principal. Principal Gaines stood at the field's edge. His pale blue shirt slightly rumpled, sunglasses perched on his forehead. He looked to Amia and nodded, the official signal. Chad swallowed. His back was slick with sweat, his hands trembling slightly. But the rush of emotion surging through him wasn't fatigue. It was an unfamiliar sting of embarrassment. Because he, accustomed to victory and podium finishes, had just spent the last stretch pushing the wheelchair of the very girl he'd toppled this morning, in front of the entire school. And the most terrifying part, no one defended him. No mocking taunts from his closest friends, no forced laughter from those who usually fawned over him. Just silence, and a few eyes appraising him anew, as if reevaluating the entire person of Chad Benson. Behind him, Hunter Sloan stared at the ground. Mike Radley fished out his phone only to switch off the screen, refusing to record another moment. No more pats on the back, no more, "Nice job, Chad," because he was no longer Chad the champion. Amia bent down beside Trinity. "Who do you choose to have lunch with the principal?" Trinity turned her head, her eyes sweeping the crowd before settling on Amaya. "You?" Amia smiled softly. "And who's cleaning the cafeteria all week?" This time, Trinity lifted her gaze straight to Chad. Her eyes weren't angry, but they glinted like steel in the sun. She didn't need to speak. The rule was the rule. Chad understood. Red Team, including himself, would scrub tables and gather trash every lunch period for an entire week, grinning awkwardly as they said, "Excuse me," to the cafeteria staff he'd once sneered at as "that old lady on oxygen." Coach Ramirez approached and clapped 3 firm times. "Excellent work. All teams performed admirably. And thank you, Red Team, for a truly memorable event." Beneath his congratulatory tone lay a pointed glance toward Chad, an unspoken lesson in sportsmanship the coach had long tried to impart, but which Chad had always ignored. Chad said nothing. His face was as tight as a drum, his lips pressed so hard they'd gone pale. From the stands, a male voice rang out, "Amazing job, Trinity." Another chimed in, "You're incredible." Trinity remained still. Yet for the first time in a long while she felt recognized, not out of pity, but because people genuinely saw her. Amia gave Trinity's wheelchair a gentle push. "Let's go. This is our celebration." As the 2 girls left the field, the sun dipped behind the trees lining the pitch. The echoes of applause trailed after them, mingling with a rising sense among the onlookers. A quiet but unmistakable shift. Chad stood in place, silent. Not because he'd been beaten, but because for the first time he realized he wasn't the story's focus. And the cost of arrogance was standing sidelined while someone else stepped into the spotlight. As Trinity wheeled away from the field, she glanced back, not to look for Chad, but to confirm something that had just slipped off her shoulders. Fear. But for Chad Benson, the fear was only just beginning. He couldn't fully explain why, but every push he'd given Trinity's wheelchair during the relay, in the roar of cheers, under dozens of raised phone cameras, with hundreds of eyes on him, had exposed something he'd always hidden, the helplessness of losing power. That feeling didn't come from the baton in Trinity's hand. It didn't come from straining to push the heavy chair over uneven grass. It came from Trinity's voice, calm, precise, and utterly unwilling to be ignored. "Left a little, not so hard. The chair's tilting, keep it balanced. I don't need fast, I need steady." The last remark stunned him. Not for what she said, but for how she said it. Cool, but not cold. Clear, but not mocking. It sounded like the voice of someone used to being controlled, yet who still claimed her own agency. Chad, who once ran the show, was now being directed. And strangely, he couldn't object. Jefferson's field looked flat to most, but only someone like Trinity knew its true slopes. Every bump and dip he navigated was a metaphor for the years she'd spent wheeling herself across the cold stones of indifference, discrimination, and mockery. No one had caught her when her wheels caught a rut. No one had seen the scrape on her elbow when she fell outside the library entrance that no one would open for her. No one had asked why she arrived 10 minutes early to class, because she needed every extra second just to traverse a hallway. Today, Chad had seen it all. He'd felt every jolt of the chair, heard every quiet instruction from Trinity, sensed the gaze of onlookers not with admiration, but with scrutiny. The race was over. Trinity raised the baton high. Chad stopped behind her, breath coming in short gasps, his shirt soaked through with sweat. Yet, no one paid attention to him. No one offered a handshake. No one asked, "You okay?" Because for the first time, he hadn't been the one to secure victory. He'd been guided. After the event, as the crowd began to disperse, Hunter and Mike trailed awkwardly behind him, neither speaking. Hunter tugged at his cap, turning it over in his hands as if avoiding Chad's eye. Mike stared at his phone, though nothing new had popped up. "That was weird," Hunter muttered. "Right?" Chad didn't answer. He was busy staring at his muddy, scuffed sneakers, much like the jumbled thoughts in his mind, no longer lined up like they used to be. Later that day, in the clubroom on the second floor, Amia sat alone, replaying a student's video of the relay. The clip showed Trinity lifting the baton, sunlight slanting over her shoulder like an unearned halo. But what quieted Amia was Chad's face, a raw, unguarded expression of uncertainty, shame, and confusion. She paused the frame, not to savor his discomfort, not to brag about victory, but to remember. Not everyone changes when exposed, but exposure is the first step toward change. She jotted a quick note beneath the screenshot. A race on uneven ground, and not everyone realizes they're slipping. At that same moment, Chad sat in the kitchen as his mother called him to dinner. He remained at the table, a walnut wood centerpiece covered with photos of him holding MVP trophies from the basketball court. He studied the largest frame, himself in uniform, clutching a golden cup, grinning wide. A big smile, but not the kind Trinity wore today, one that didn't need to shout, yet hushed an entire field. He stood and pulled the photo from its frame, and for the first time in years, Chad Benson wondered. If no one else feared him anymore, who was he left to be? The relay baton still rested firmly in Trinity's hand, held high above her head, steady, unassuming. She held it as a statement, not "I've won," but "I've always been strong. It just took you this long to see it." In that moment, the entire Jefferson field seemed to freeze. Only she remained, bathed in the late afternoon glow, the serene face of a black girl in a wheelchair illuminated by the sun. Behind her, Chad Benson stood motionless, his hands still gripping the wheelchair's push rims, as if holding on to a reality crumbling beneath him. He didn't dare pull his hands back, not for fear she'd fall, but because he himself had lost his balance. From the stands, the applause began softly. First, a few teachers rising to their feet, then scattered clusters of students joining in. Soon, it swelled like wildfire racing through dry timber, erupting in cheers, whistles, and calls of "Trinity," echoing across the grass. Amia stood a few paces away, hands on her hips, her gaze fixed on Trinity. She didn't rush forward. She knew Trinity needed this time, to simply be present, to receive, to exist fully without being overshadowed. In one corner of the stands, Mrs. Carter dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Coach Ramirez stood arms crossed, nodding slowly, as if marking a moment destined to be remembered for years. Across the field, Principal Gaines, usually the picture of composure, broke into a genuine smile for the first time. He turned to the school videographer and quietly said, "Save this clip for the end-of-year ceremony." And Chad stood rooted in place, unable to leave his spot. Not because anyone ordered him to, but because an earthquake was raging inside him. He, the boy who once saw Trinity's wheelchair as an obstacle, who called her a mobile burden, who sent her sprawling at the school gate like trash, was now the one who had pushed her to the finish. And that victory, it was his too, just not in the way he'd ever known. It didn't lift his chin in pride. It forced him to bow his head, for the first time, not to pick something up, but to look at himself. His eyes roved the crowd, and saw faces that once laughed alongside him now regard him like a stranger. No one jeered, no one cheered him on, only a strange hush, the hush reserved for those who have lost something precious. Amia stepped closer. She didn't touch Trinity. She didn't touch Chad. She simply stood beside them, then turned to Principal Gaines and announced clearly, "By the agreed rules, the winning team chooses one member for the leadership lunch. The losers will clean the cafeteria." Principal Gaines nodded. Trinity turned back, her eyes meeting Amaya's. "I choose you." Just 3 words, yet enough to settle any debate over who truly inspired everyone today. Amia smiled and nodded. Then she faced Chad. "And you, as I said at the start, you will cooperate, all next week, with the mop." There was no mockery in her tone. It was as calm as a verdict delivered without a court, because Chad had just proven it himself. As Trinity and Amia left the field, the wheelchair rolled slowly, grass dust clinging to its wheels, sunlight gilding their shoulders. One walking, one seated, yet both upright, both moving toward the light. Trinity said nothing. But in her eyes burned a light no one had ever noticed before. Not the light of victory, but the light of someone stepping out from the shadows of neglect without losing herself. Chad remained behind. He slid his hands from the rims and looked down at them. Dust, sweat, and something he couldn't name. Perhaps shame, perhaps awakening. Then he turned and walked away, not running, not shouting, not reacting, just silent, like someone who's lost his last weapon, the right to belittle others. That evening, the relay video circulated through the student network. An anonymous post read, "The boy who knocked her down today pushed her across the finish." And the most hearted comment below said, "Sometimes, victory isn't about who runs fastest, but who admits they were wrong, and still pushes toward what's right." That night, the clip of the final relay popped up on the student forum. No fancy filters, no soundtrack, no edits, just a shaky phone recording of Trinity holding the baton aloft. And behind her, Chad Benson standing silent like a mute shadow. Under the video, the very first comment read, "She didn't need someone to help her up. She just needed someone to stop knocking her down." The next afternoon, 3 firm knocks echoed on the door of the second-floor faculty lounge. Amia Cross walked in, no books, no clipboard, just herself, her gaze as sharp as a mirror, and her voice unnervingly calm. Inside sat Mrs. Carter, still shuffling student files, and Principal Gaines, his shirt neatly tucked, seated behind the dark wood desk worn smooth at the edges by time. "Sir, ma'am," Amia began once the polite greeting was exchanged, "we don't want him suspended." Mrs. Carter paused, pen hovering. Principal Gaines rested his hands on the desk, inclined his head to listen. Amia didn't need notes. Every word was etched into her heart from the day before. "We want change." Mrs. Carter set down her pen. Principal Gaines waited. Amia pressed on. Everyone saw him knock Trinity down and leave her there. No one did a thing. No one spoke up. No one asked why. And the scary part is that silence became reflex. A heavy hush settled in the room. Afternoon light slanted through the window, casting a crisscross of shadows on the desktop, like the barred marks of an overlooked choice. "That has to be fixed," Amia continued. "Not just Chad, but everyone who stayed silent, teachers, classmates, this entire school." Principal Gaines, the same man who once boomed encouragement through a megaphone on the sports field, now simply sat, silent, listening. "Give us 10 minutes, Amia said. "At tomorrow morning's all-school assembly, let Trinity and me speak about what everyone needs to hear." Mrs. Carter looked to the principal and nodded. No further debate was needed, no committee meeting scheduled. This request wasn't born of anger, but of awareness. "You'll have 10 minutes, Principal Gaines said. "I trust you two will accomplish more than 10 years of lectures." The next morning, Jefferson's auditorium was packed wall-to-wall with students. The plastic-topped chairs creaked each time someone sat. The air buzzed with curiosity, anxiety, and silence. A last-minute announcement introduced a special presentation. No one knew exactly what to expect, but everyone stayed, even Chad. He sat in the back row, hands clasped, palms slick. No one forced him here, but he knew he had to come, partly from curiosity, partly because avoidance was no longer an option. When Principal Gaines stepped onto the stage, he skipped his usual speech and simply said, "Today, 2 of our students have something to share, and I believe it's worth breaking our silence." Amia Cross wheeled Trinity Hayes onto the stage. No handheld mics, just 2 standing microphones. Amia stood, Trinity sat, but there was no height difference now. Their equality came from what they were about to say, not from their positions. Amia began, "Yesterday, 1 student was knocked down in front of the school gates. Someone got hurt, and dozens of people witnessed it, but no one did anything." Her voice wasn't loud, but every ear caught every word. No one dared cough or glance at a phone. Some laughed, some turned away, some pretended not to see, but today we're not here to assign blame. We're here to remind you that silence is a choice too. Amia placed a hand on the wheelchair. Trinity continued, "I'm Trinity Hayes. I've sat in this chair for as long as I can remember. I didn't think it was a problem until you all treated me like one." She paused and drew a breath. "Yesterday I fell, but it wasn't the first time. I've fallen when my wheels caught library cracks, when a classmate pulled my chair out from under me, when it rained and no one held the door. I've fallen many times. But what I remember isn't the fall. It's who didn't catch me." The auditorium was held together by an invisible thread of stillness. Trinity gripped the armrest lightly. "I don't need apologies from the whole school. I just need a promise that next time someone will step forward. Just one person is enough." Amia finished. "And if you don't know where to start with the moments you stayed silent." At the back, Chad stared at the floor. For the entire presentation, he didn't look up, yet every word pierced through the uniform he wore like a fragile shell. When the applause finally rose, first from the teachers, then swelling like a wave, Chad stood. No one told him to, no one forced him. He walked toward the aisle. Turning the corner by the library, he found Trinity and Amia sitting side by side, reading a thin paperback, soft smiles playing on their lips like early morning light. Chad inhaled and approached. He began, scratching the back of his neck. "I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. I just thought it was a joke." Amia said nothing. Trinity looked up. Her eyes weren't cold or harsh, just expectant. "I'm sorry," Chad said, his voice bare for the first time. "Really? I was an asshole." Trinity studied him for a long moment, then gently, "I forgive you, but I don't need your apology." He blinked. "I need you to change," she said. Chad froze, then nodded. I will try, and if you ever need that squeaky chair fixed, I'm pretty handy with a wrench." Trinity shrugged. "We'll see." For the first time, Chad walked away, not because he'd won, but because he finally faced the right thing. As Chad Benson turned away from the library corridor, he couldn't yet name the mix of loss and relief surging inside him. Maybe it was the first time he'd walked away not to avoid, but to acknowledge. And in the vast auditorium across the hall, where Trinity Hayes had just finished her speech, silence was no longer complicity. It had become listening. That morning, when Trinity and Amia rolled out onto the stage, sunlight streamed through the large, spring-tinted windows, bathing everything in a soft amber glow. They didn't wear matching uniforms like the other presenters. Trinity sat in her wheelchair, her white blouse slightly rumpled, one hem draping over the right wheel. Amia wore a black t-shirt stamped with the words, "Listen louder." No one rose to applaud as they took the stage. There was no grand soundtrack, no blinding spotlights, only a taut hush of anticipation. Amia lifted the microphone, her hand steady, her eyes sweeping the packed rows of students crammed shoulder to shoulder. Only this time without the usual murmuring or furtive phone checks under the desks. "She didn't fall because of her wheelchair," Amia said, her voice low and measured. "She fell because someone thought she deserved to." The room fell silent. Those words not only called out wrongdoing, they challenged every person present. She handed the mic to Trinity. Trinity gripped it, lifting it to her lips. "I'm Trinity Hayes," she began, her gaze steady. "I've sat in this chair for as long as I can remember. I never saw it as a barrier until your eyes turned it into a wall." No one laughed. No one whispered. She continued, every word sinking in like rain into dry earth. "I didn't fall from exhaustion. I fell because I was shoved by someone who thought it was funny. But what hurt most wasn't the fall. It was how everyone just stood there, did nothing, said nothing. No one reached out a hand." Her voice remained calm, yet carried weight. It wasn't an angry shout. It was the cracking of a hope long suffocated. "My mother works 2 jobs to fix this wheelchair when it breaks. I've spent nights teaching myself to stand back up, with no one there to catch me. I'm not a character in some inspirational movie. I'm just a girl who wants to go to school, to be heard, to be respected." A hush deepened. "I don't need your pity. I just need you to understand that I'm not weak. I don't need to stand up to prove I'm strong. I just need never to be forced to bow my head." Something shifted in the crowd. A few eyes dropped, a few fists clenched. In a middle row, Hunter Sloan sat biting his lip. Mike Radley, for the first time, looked genuinely uncomfortable. Amia stepped forward. "Change doesn't come from speeches alone. It comes from small actions, a non-judgmental glance, a reminder when someone crosses the line. A hand offered, not out of pity, but out of respect." She turned to Trinity, who nodded ever so slightly. "We don't need the whole school to change at once," Amia concluded. "We only need one person. Starting today, starting with anyone in this room." And then silence. Not the heavy kind, but the kind that waits for action. When the applause finally came, it wasn't thunderous like at a trophy ceremony. It was measured, voluntary, sincere, rolling outward, one heartbeat at a time, as if Jefferson Middle School was learning to applaud recognition that didn't rely on glittering spectacle. Principal Gaines walked onto the stage afterward, and without saying a word, placed a hand on Amia's and Trinity's shoulders. A small gesture, but weightier than any formal commendation. At the end of the assembly, Chad stayed behind. He didn't sit in the back row this time. He'd taken a seat in the center. As Trinity rolled past on her way out, Chad stood quietly. He said nothing, but his eyes met hers without avoidance, without arrogance, without excuse. And Trinity nodded. Just once, gently. Not as a full pardon, but like a door finally closing, yet left unlocked. The echoes of that morning's assembly drifted through Jefferson Middle School like a slow-burning smoke, never erupting into flames, but seeping into every hallway, bench, elevator, and bulletin board, places where indifference once reigned. At last, Chad Benson stepped out of the auditorium. No one stopped him. No one moved aside like before. But this time, his solitude didn't come from someone ignoring him. It came from everyone truly looking at him. No more fake admiration in their eyes. No more school politics pats on the back. Just direct gazes, neither hateful nor idolizing, but the eyes of people asking themselves, "Is this really the same Chad?" And that suffocated him. The second-floor corridor felt emptier than usual. He walked slowly past the familiar classroom doors where he used to nudge other students or burst into laughter when a teacher's back was turned. Today, everything was quiet, as if the school were giving him a chance to hear his own voice and recognize how hollow it sounded. When he neared the library entrance, once territory reserved for nerds, a place he only ever passed through to mock, he saw two familiar figures. Amia Cross sat on the stone steps outside the library, grinning, a small notebook in her hand. Beside her, Trinity Hayes leaned forward, head in her hands, shoulders shaking with soft laughter. They looked startlingly ordinary. They didn't look around, they didn't pretend to be victorious, they didn't play the victim. They were just two 13-year-old girls, sharing a laugh after class like any other kids. And for Chad, that cut the deepest, because he had never known how to laugh like that. So freely, so undefended. He froze in place, less than 6 feet away. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with uncertainty about how to speak as the boy who'd knocked her down. One hand gripped his backpack strap. The other scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. Then, he stepped forward. Trinity looked up first. Her eyes betrayed no surprise, no defense, only the calm readiness to listen. Amaya tilted her head, silent, letting him choose his words. Chad began, his voice rough and worn. A pause. "I didn't mean for things to go this far," he continued, eyes fixed on the space between them. "I thought it was just a joke." Amia didn't blink, arms folded, her face neither cold nor forgiving, as if waiting not for excuses but for something honest. Chad exhaled. "I'm sorry," he said, this time looking at Trinity. "Not a fake sorry, I know I was wrong. I was a jerk." Trinity said nothing for a few seconds. Sunlight slanted across the library's skylight, pale gold sliding across her cheek and highlighting the still fresh scrape on her right elbow. Then she spoke, her voice as gentle as a spring breeze. "I forgive you." Chad blinked, hardly believing his ears. But Trinity went on, "But I don't need your apology." Chad stopped, his lips pressed together. Trinity met his gaze, unflinching. "I need you to do better, not for me, but for anyone who comes after me, anyone, treated like I was." Those words weren't heavy, but they knocked the last of Chad's pride to the floor. He nodded. No grand promise, no big "I swear." Just a small, honest nod. "I'll try. And if that wheelchair's still squeaking, I happen to be pretty handy with a wrench. I won't break it, promise." Trinity quirked an eyebrow, not exactly a smile, but an open door. "We'll see," she said, then bent to turn a page. Amia murmured, almost as an aside, "And you? If you really want to do right, start by listening." Chad nodded again and turned to walk away, without looking back. But behind him, forgiveness was no longer out of reach, and change, perhaps, had finally begun. That afternoon, in the quiet library aisles under cold fluorescent lights, the two girls sat together in silence, reading an old poem. No one spoke of Chad again. They had said what needed saying, and the rest of the change was up to everyone else. When Chad Benson walked away, his steps were slow, not out of hesitation, but because for the first time, he wasn't lugging his usual heavy ego. That brief conversation wasn't the end. It was a quiet beginning, a single rest note after the cacophony he'd always made. And in that silence, something began to shift. Not with fireworks or fanfare, but enough to stir. The next day at Jefferson, a gentle rain fell. The sky was a slate gray, hallways cold and damp. Yet somehow the school felt warmer. For the first time in months, Trinity Hayes didn't have to shoulder the classroom door open. As she approached, a boy named Marcus stood and quietly held it for her. No words, no drama, just a small act. But Trinity noticed. During homeroom, Mrs. Carter spoke about the power of silence, a topic that, on the schedule, had been career guidance. No one objected. That day, the whole class wanted to listen. In the cafeteria, Chad Benson and his two friends, Hunter and Mike, were donning plastic gloves, wiping tables, finally facing the cafeteria workers as equals, not as prospective customers or Mr. Benson's kid. Chad said nothing. He bent to the work in silence. When someone spilled orange juice on the third table, he didn't call for help. He grabbed a rag himself. He still struggled to say, "I'm sorry," but he was starting to learn how to listen with action. In the teacher's lounge, Mrs. Carter recounted something to Principal Gaines that left him silently nodding. This morning, Chad arrived early. He stood outside the lounge for almost 5 minutes before knocking. He didn't ask for any special favors. He only asked, "May I stay and listen to the teacher meeting on supporting students with disabilities?" Principal Gaines removed his glasses and wiped them on his shirt. He said nothing, just nodded, slow and sure. A week after the assembly, a new notice appeared by the library, printed on pale yellow paper. Circle of Sharing, where every student is both heard and heard from. Every Friday, room 204, no grades, no judgment. Proposed by Amia Cross. First participant, Trinity Hayes. Third name, scrawled awkwardly on the list, Chad Benson. At that first Circle of Sharing meeting, when a 7th grader named Lana, haunted by being labeled invisible nerd, finished her story, the room felt thick. She didn't cry, but her eyes were red. Chad sat across from her. He didn't speak at first. Then, hesitantly, he raised his hand. "I used to be the one who silenced others, because I thought I had the right. Now I'm here to learn when to stay silent and when to speak up." Lana looked at him surprised. Another student nodded quietly, and Amia, the facilitator, didn't smile, but her eyes lit up. Not because Chad was reformed, but because he had begun to listen. One late afternoon, when almost everyone had left, Chad slipped into the library. Trinity was still there, reviewing art project posters for School Inclusion Month with a friend named Lena. Chad didn't approach right away, but when Trinity looked up and met his eyes, he held out a small blue plastic piece, a spare wheel part. "I noticed your chair still squeaks. Maybe you just need to swap this," he said. No pushiness, no permission asked. Trinity studied it for a moment. Then, instead of saying, "Thank you," she said, "I was wondering if you'd bring it." Chad actually laughed, genuine, not mocking, like someone relieved to shed a tight mask. "You win," he said. Trinity replied, "I'm not playing to win. I just want to be heard without shouting." That night, on the school's digital bulletin board, one quote had been changed. It used to read, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Now it read, "Listen more closely to the silence." No attribution was given, but everyone at Jefferson knew. It came from the kid who once spoke the loudest. The echoes from that morning's assembly drifted through Jefferson Middle School like a slow-burning haze, never erupting in flames, yet seeping into every hallway, every bench, every elevator, every bulletin board, places where apathy once reigned supreme. Chad Benson was the last to step out of the auditorium. No one stopped him. No one even moved aside as they used to. But this time, the feeling of being alone didn't come from being ignored. It came from everyone actually watching him. Really watching him. That afternoon, the circle of sharing officially took root from what had been a 10-minute special session. Room 204, once the forgotten French club meeting room, became a Friday refuge for students from every grade. There were no raised teachers' chairs. Everyone sat in a circle, equal. No microphones, no grades, just stories that had been choking at the back of young throats. The kids who used to be the loudest in class were now learning when silence was best, and how to let others speak. And among the names that showed up faithfully every week was one that stayed quiet during those first few sessions: Chad Benson. He didn't have to be there. No one forced him. But he came, on time, sat in the same spot, hands resting on his knees, back straight as if waiting for a signal he couldn't yet name. At first, the others whispered, "Isn't that the guy this circle was made for?" But, him? Yet, over time, they realized Chad hadn't come to wipe the slate clean. He'd come to stare at his mistakes, longer, closer, until he couldn't look away. One Friday afternoon in April, after PE, Trinity Hayes was late to lunch. She wheeled down the hall, her chair's wheels clicking softly, a sound she no longer felt ashamed of. She'd learned to let it ring out like a declaration. Approaching the lunch table, she paused. The long table by the windows, the only spot she could ever snag, usually by the trash cans or the humming AC unit, had a small sign waiting for her. Cut from cardstock, its edges taped in yellow, the handwriting uneven but clear. Reserved for Trinity and those who refused to stay silent. She looked around. No one lurking, no phones recording. This wasn't a prank. On the table sat 3 lunch trays already set out. One for Amia, one for Lena, that 7th grader who shared at the circle, and one for Chad. Chad wasn't sitting there, but his chicken sandwich was warm, his milk carton unopened. A napkin bore a scribbled quote: "Today we stay silent, tomorrow we will listen." Trinity wheeled into the spot. She didn't speak, but for the first time in years of eating lunch alone, she didn't have to hunt for a place, because a place had found her. In class, teachers began rewriting their lesson plans. Instead of writing biographies of historical heroes, students were asked to recount a moment they'd witnessed real courage on campus. A 6th grader named Jordan moved Mrs. Carter to pause the class for a few minutes. "I saw a hero who didn't wear a cape. She was in a wheelchair, but she pushed me when I twisted my ankle on the playground. She didn't fly, she didn't shout, she just stayed silent and did what needed doing." The cafeteria, once a hotbed of gossip and jokes, now hosted a student-led broadcast every Wednesday, spotlighting "One thing I stayed silent about, and now I want to say." One week, it was Chad's turn. His voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "I used to be the loudest person in the room. So today, I'm taking a minute to say nothing at all, to make space for those whose voices I used to drown out. Thank you for not being silent like I once hoped you would be." The entire school observed one full minute of silence, not because it was a rule, but because everyone understood. This silence was respect. By mid-April, Principal Gaines posted a new poster on the bulletin board, drawn by the 8th grade art club. It featured a black girl in a wheelchair and another girl standing beside her, holding up a relay baton. They didn't face the viewer. They gazed straight ahead. Underneath ran the caption, "Strength doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it rolls toward the light." No names were written, but everyone at Jefferson Middle School knew exactly who they were, and for the first time in years, the school didn't need a new rule book to teach students how to behave. Only a true example to follow. The spring talent show at Jefferson Middle School that year began like any other, but it ended with an aftershock nobody could forget. Beneath the amber glow of the stage lights, between the annual hip-hop dances, ukulele performances, and short comedy sketches, two girls stepped out. No props, no backing track, no special effects. Only two microphones, and an audience holding its breath to hear what they'd say. Amia Cross stood tall, wearing a white t-shirt stamped with the words, "Softness is not surrender." Trinity Hayes rolled her wheelchair to her side, chin lifted, her hair braided into neat coils by her mother, lips pressed together as though she were holding back a song long playing in her heart. No introduction was needed. Amia spoke first, her voice steady as a heartbeat. "They say silent girls cannot lead." Trinity picked up the line, her voice soft as silk, yet striking the ears like a blade. "But I once saw someone use silence to shatter prejudice." The auditorium fell completely silent. Their next lines wove together like dagger and lace. "I was once a question in other people's eyes. Now I'm the full stop to every rumor. I used to be the squeak in a silent hallway. Now I'm the drumbeat others follow." They didn't have to raise their voices. The entire school leaned in, like trees bending to a strong spring wind. In the back row, Trinity's mother, wearing a faded lavender dress, stood with arms crossed, tears falling silently. She had once told her daughter, "Don't hope they see you, Trinity. Make them listen." And now, everyone was listening. Amia closed, "We're not standing on any mountaintop. We're just rising above prejudice." A single beat of awe-filled silence. Not the awkward hush of politeness, but the stunned stillness of true admiration. Then, like a coiled string finally released, the applause erupted. No one stayed seated. Jefferson's auditorium leapt to its feet, knowing they had witnessed something unforgettable. In a middle row, Chad Benson sat beside his sixth-grade brother. His little brother's eyes were wide as he whispered, "She's so cool." Chad nodded slowly. No smile, no empty platitude, just a quiet murmur to himself. "See, that's real strength, not a punch, not a shout, but the calm that breaks down decaying walls." That very evening, at the school council meeting, a teacher raised her hand unexpectedly and said, "I'm not here to propose a budget. I just want to say, today I relearned how to be a teacher," from two eighth-grade girls. 3 weeks later, a video of Trinity and Amia's spoken word performance was posted on the school website, then shared across the state's education forums. It racked up over 14,000 views in a month. High schools everywhere began to ask, "Who coached them?" And Jefferson replied, "They weren't coached, they just said what no one else dared to say." The following Monday, Trinity entered class as usual. No fanfare, no red carpet. But on her desk lay a small card, handwriting slanted across it. "I used to laugh at how fast you wheeled. Now I see you race in a different way. Thank you for never stopping." No name was signed. Trinity folded the card and tucked it into her pocket. She didn't need to know who wrote it, just that someone had been listening. In his office, Principal Gaines pinned the new poster beside the old motto. He didn't remove the old one. He simply added a handwritten line below it. "True voices need no permission to be heard." That That nameless card still lies in the little left-hand pocket of Trinity's backpack, alongside a worn penny and the unfinished draft of a poem she's never read aloud. But she keeps them. Tokens of the unspoken, the yet-to-be-said, heavy with meaning. By the end of the school year, spring breezes swept through every pane of glass at Jefferson. White magnolia blossoms lined the walkways, and sparrows darted across the yard as if winter had never come. Yet this year, Jefferson changed for reasons beyond the season. It changed because of a quiet, irreversible shift. At the final meeting of the Student Diversity Council, Amia Cross was elected its new chair, unopposed, no campaign necessary. She was chosen not because she talked the most, but because she spoke truths no one else dared utter. Chad Benson was there too. He sat in back, didn't raise his hand, didn't make a speech. Yet at the end of the meeting he was the first to stand and wipe the whiteboard clean, then tidy the tables. No one told him to, and no one was surprised. Meanwhile, Trinity Hayes embarked on her next chapter at Washington High, a much larger school with modern elevators and smooth, sloping hallways for wheelchairs. But what made her laugh wasn't the new architecture. It was the group of ninth graders greeting her on day one, their name tags reading, "Welcome, Trinity. We know who you are." She hadn't become famous for a speech. She was known for daring to be herself when everyone else wanted her to stay silent. One blazing summer afternoon, Trinity and her mother returned to Selma, the place her mother grew up, where civil rights marchers once met barricades on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. They didn't speak much as they rolled across the bridge, but each turn of Trinity's wheels on the pavement echoed something ancient and undeniably real. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "People think courage is about standing up and shouting," she said. Trinity gazed ahead, sunlight catching the weathered iron of the bridge like a spotlight on history. "But sometimes," she replied softly, "courage is about sitting and still moving forward. No flags, no drum beats, just one more turn of the wheels, one more day at school, one more time without bowing her head." Back at Jefferson, just before summer break, something surprising appeared on the main hallway wall. A new mural. No announcements, no ribbon cutting. One Monday morning, it was simply there. Two girls, one standing, one seated in a wheelchair, both facing forward. No borders, no names, no distinguishing details, just their gazes, their equality. Above them, painted in bold letters, "Respect doesn't ask permission." Principal Gaines stood looking at the mural, coffee cup in hand, flanked by Mrs. Carter and several teachers. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Mrs. Carter exhaled softly, "They don't need us to teach them anymore. They're teaching us." Principal Gaines nodded, his eyes fixed on the girl in the wheelchair. "And they're teaching us without shouting, just by refusing to stay silent." Summer arrived, and Jefferson fell quiet like any school between terms. But in emptied lockers, a few things remained. A note reading, "Are you okay today?" An old circle poster, and a small mirror taped inside a locker door with words scrawled in marker, "I don't have to be tall to be seen." In a hallway corner, Chad leaned his shoulder against the wall to watch the mural. A sixth grader passed by and asked, "Do you know who the girl in the wheelchair is?" Chad smiled. He didn't answer right away. Then, after a few seconds, "I don't just know. I used to be the reason she fell. And now, I want to be the reason no one else falls." The boy looked at him as if he'd just heard something monumental. Chad turned and walked on, his shoulder still streaked with paint from helping to finish the mural yesterday. A small mark, but also a promise. There are acts that need no words. Heroes who don't have to stand up to be seen, and stories that, though they begin with a fall, end with a community rising together. Trinity never had to shout to be heard. Amia never needed power to spark change. And Chad, the one who once stood on the wrong side, learned to stand on the right side by truly listening. What about you? Have you ever witnessed a small act that changed an entire group? Share that story in the comments below, because your story could be the spark someone else needs. If you believe this story deserves to be heard, hit like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another inspiring story. Strength doesn't require standing tall. Sometimes it only requires not falling.